This video is not a test nor a classic farewell. It is a long-term review. I have driven the Skoda ENYAQ in everyday use since mid-2021. First an ENYAQ iV ATX from around 2.5 years and approximately 50,000 kilometers. Then this ENYAQ RS here with the newer technology for another 1.5 years and around 40,000 kilometers. In addition, there are roughly 50 to 60,000 kilometers with press and test vehicles of the ENYAQ and L Rock. What follows is my personal assessment of the MEB platform at Skoda. It is based on my own use and on feedback from many users, from you. At charging stations and in comments and via email you told me all those informations. And with that, hello friends of the electrified charging fun and welcome to Electrified Speicher. The ENYAQ was never a perfect car, but it matured very quickly. Unfortunately, this maturation often came at the expense of the existing customers, especially due to the limit update capability that still exists today. I'm talking about software here. At the same time, the ENYAQ was an unusually honest car for many of us. Not because it was flawless, but because we knew what we are getting into. There were no surprises. The performance was solid, and it was always clear where its strengths were and where they were not. And due to this channel, according to a lot of mails from you, you know what you were up to. The greatest strengths of the ENYAQ are not spectacular individual features. The overall characteristic that prove themselves in everyday use is it. The driving performance is consistently solid. The trunk is still one of its best in the vehicle class. That one back there is awesome. The interior concept is calm and clear and suitable for long distances. And it got physical buttons. In summer, range and efficiency are quite good. In winter, consumption increases noticeably but remains within a practical range. The driver assistance systems works reliably and predictably in most situations. And the greatest strength of the ENYAQ for me, however, is its inconspicuous nature. The transition is easy, the operation feels similar, and the vehicle integrates naturally into everyday life. In its character, the ENYAQ remains a Skoda. And that is exactly what makes it accessible for many people. The software was and still is one of the ENYAQ's greatest weaknesses. Especially in the early years with the first model generation, it was problematic. From software version 5 onward, many things became more stable and usable. Nevertheless, errors, functional gaps and missed opportunities remain. Updates are rare or only available via the workshop. New functions are largely absent, like charging provider filters or a dog mode to just name 2 out of many. At the same time, this criticism needs a bit of context, I guess, because for many users the software offers more than enough. Software is not the central benchmark for everyone. For many people, everyday usability is what matters most, and in many practical aspects the ENYAQ performs very strongly here. This is where a well-known paradox of car buying becomes visible. Customers don't buy a car just to own a car. They buy it for what it enables. Or, to be more precise, they buy it for getting jobs done based on rare exceptions, like the big furniture purchase or the long-distance journey. That is what we think of and that is what we justify the purchase with. At least a lot of people do so. But once we own these cars, our reality and our jobs change because we experience our cars, mostly in everyday routines. 95% of the time, we do school runs and commuting and small errands, you name it. And in the end, we judge our cars not on those rare exceptions that convinced us to buy them. We judge them on those small irritations we face again and again in everyday life. And that is exactly where the real weaknesses become visible as well. And that is what you write me month and month over and over again. And some of those topics run through all the years. The first generation has no true battery preconditioning. In winter, there were recurring issues with the 12-volt battery spanning over all model years. And all the trouble with the software like flickering displays or non-usable time-shifted charging. And so many more. Still, it remains clear that the ENYAQ functions are reliable in everyday use. Not spectacularly, but steadily. Improvements to the ENYAQ did not happen suddenly. There were no disruptive leaps. What is impressive, however, is how quickly Skoda caught up since 2021, technically and dynamically. So this also is reflected, by the way, in the sales figures, as ENYAQ and Aerox perform extraordinarily well. And that development for me is understandable. What is still missing is a consistent evolution for existing customers through software updates. So the base direction is right and the future is electric. Skoda has understood that. Just a quick side note to the Elroq. The Elroq starts without all the difficult legacy of the ENYAQ. It begins at a level that the ENYAQ had to work toward over several years. It is therefore not fundamentally better, but it starts where the ENYAQ stands today, over all those years of improvements. And if this review feels too short for you, don't worry. You find detailed videos on almost every topic here on my channel. And many of the older videos are still valid, because cars simply do not change that quickly. And to sum everything up, my personal conclusion with the ENYAQ was, what else should it be, a trip to Denmark. On the return journey we drove from Sjællands to Mels, 1,350 kilometers in one stretch. My wife and I took turns driving. Pure driving time was 13 hours, and the conditions were demanding. Temperatures between -1 and -6 degrees Celsius, snow, frost, sleet and wind. Consumption was therefore 25.7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. This is acceptable in winter, but it significantly reduces range compared to summer. Everything is included in this figure, by the way. Preheating the battery before every charging. A battery that barely warms up while driving at these temperatures needs to be preheated. 22 degrees Celsius inside, music and seat heating. There was no conscious restraint. Converted, this corresponds to around 2.5 liters of diesel per 100 kilometers. In total, 363 kilowatt hours were charged, including charging before departure. 346 kilowatt hours were consumed, and that corresponds to a charging loss of around 4.7%. Charging was done exclusively at Ionity with a subscription with a total cost of 119 euros. That equals around 8.8 euros per 100 kilometers. For comparison, the average diesel price in Germany at that time was 1,72 euro, and the Skoda Karoq diesel consumes about 6.4 liters of diesel per 100 kilometers according to Sprit Monitor. This equals to around 11 euros per 100 kilometers, and for the full distance that would be roughly 86 liters of diesel or around 847 kilowatt hours of energy. That means the diesel requires more than twice the energy for the same distance. There were 7 stops, 2 of them were purely bathroom breaks, during which around 8 kilowatt hours were still charged at the time. And 5 stops were actually charging stops. 1 also includes lunch and 1 dinner. Total break time was around 2.5 hours. With 13 hours of driving, that results in a total travel time of 15.5 hours. This is, I guess, normal for that distance and a quite well thing. My conclusion from this trip is simple. Just do it. It is still discussed dismissively at the regulars table, mostly without the real experience, but with firm opinions. Driving replaces talk. Just do it. And it does not play a decisive role which electric car you drive. It does not always have to be a Skoda. And therefore this trip closes a complete chapter for me, and at the same time it opens a new one. The next video will be a more personal look at this conclusion, so until then, stay full of energy.